Well, hi. Good morning. Okay, can you all see me just fine? As from every angle? Okay. And holler if BJ needs to move her seat too. We want to make sure that you can see BJ's face. And I'm so excited that you guys are here today. And my name is Jade Metz, and I am Pastor Nathan's wife, and I'm also the outreach pastor here at Community Wesleyan Church. My husband, 4 kids, and I have been here for about a year and a half. For those new faces that are here today, we lived in East Africa for 6.5 years and moved here in the pandemic in 2020. So it's a joy to be here and to serve you all. And this month in January, we are going through a series called Next Door. And the series, if I could describe it, I think it's a series about how to empathize with our neighbors. Jesus says for us to love the Lord, our God, with all of our hearts, our souls, and our minds, and our strength, and that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. And as we know as Christians, love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. And so this month, we are hearing testimonies from our neighbors. And it is kind of a plea for the church to kind of get a little bit of peek into the life of our neighbor, and also a plea to not just feel good feelings towards them, but to act. And so today, my sweet friend BJ, she is going to speak today with us about shame and guilt. And BJ is a dignified, wonderful woman, and she is from our home church, the church that we attended for about a decade until we moved to East Africa. So she is from Marion, Indiana. Do you guys remember Pastor Bob, who spoke to us from? You do? Good. Well, he told her that we are a warm and friendly church and not to be nervous. So could you give her a Community Wesleyan warm welcome as BJ comes and sits with us? Yay! Hi, VJ.
Hi there.
Okay, can you guys see her on this side? Does she need to shift her chair at all? Are you guys good? The lights are real bright.
Whoa. Okay.
I know. Should we just sit here and close our eyes for a second and like get assimilated to the light?
Sure. And I might fall asleep.
Yeah, you might fall asleep.
Since I was up late last evening eating chips and salsa.
Yeah, thank you, Bradley's, for
Thank
keeping
you very
her
much,
really
Tom and Kathy.
So make sure you hold the mic real close to your mouth,
Okay.
because I want them to hear everything I'm going to say.
Okay.
And the church is real graceful. So they put up with me, and they'll laugh with you. They'll cry with you. If you mess up a word, they don't care. Like, they're so wonderful. So whatever you need to do, drink water. Let me open your water for you. Uh-huh. So,
So are we ready?
yeah, we're ready. Do you want to use my notepad to put your notes on, or are you good? Are you okay?
If I just put my Bible
Yep.
here, that'll help hold it.
So BJ's going to tell you her story, and then I'm going to ask a couple questions at the end. And yeah, we're excited to have you, BJ, and to see what Jesus does. And so shake off any nerves you have. We love you, and here's what I can promise you, is that after today, we will love you even more. We will love you even more. We really will, won't we? Yeah, we'll love you even more.
Thank you. It is really, really good to be here today. I just feel so blessed beyond words that Nathan and Jade wanted me to come to their church and speak to you. There were so many good words in the song sung today, but most of them I'm not going to remember. And it's like, oh, I wish I could remember that word right there. But I can tell you that all my life, God has been faithful, even when I wasn't. Even when that'll be later on in the story, but those words really spoke to me, that all my life, you have been so good. You've been so, so good. Because I chose to walk away from the Lord But he was still right there with me. He was still right there with me. I didn't acknowledge that he was there, but I know from experience that he was with me through it all. I grew up in a Christian home, attended a Wesleyan church forever, it seemed like. Went to church camp as a child, from the time I was 9 years old until 18. I was at Fairmount Camp every single summer. Could not wait to get to camp. I have 2 sisters, and we were always so excited to pack our bags and go to camp. We'd make our little packing list 14 times, and we'd get home from camp and start our list for the next year. So I had a lot of good, solid teaching at the beginning of my life. But somewhere along the way, I decided that I was going to walk away from the Lord. I'm not even really sure exactly why, but I moved away from home, and at that same time, I walked away from the Lord. And I'm losing my thoughts right now. It was just really hard I grew up I was very shy, so I didn't have a lot of friends. So when I moved away from my home, I also moved away from the Lord. Started going to frat parties and nightclubs. Started living not a very good life, actually. Not a very good life at all. One night I had a one-night stand. And knew in the back of my mind and in the depths of my soul that was wrong. But I did it anyway. And I ended up pregnant. Found out a month later that I was pregnant. And I was like, oh no, what do I do? It was a one-night stand. I don't even to this day know the guy's last name. My parents didn't know him. Nobody knew him. So there was no way that I could go through with this pregnancy. I've got to get rid of it. So I did. I had an abortion. And I'm starting to remember the feelings at that time. I think I knew something wasn't right because I grew up in church. I mean, even though we don't talk about abortion, it still didn't feel right. So I had the abortion. The nurse told me during the procedure, you're doing great, it's going to be over soon, and you can get on with your life. So I believed her. I went to work. That was on a Friday. I had the abortion on Friday, and on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I was back at work, as if I had just the normal weekend. She told me I could, so you got to believe a nurse because, I was in her care. Well, I got on with my life, sort of. I was at work all the time and just did everything you normally do, but I was numb. I was just so numb. It wasn't too long after that until I went back to church. And it was a Wesleyan church close to my home. And I got involved in the youth group, and I sang in the choir and, did all the churchy things that you do. But we didn't talk about abortion. We didn't talk about anything that awful. So I was silent for a long, long time. I'd go to the altar and I'd don't even know what I thought was going to happen. Maybe I was wanting someone to come to me at the altar and say, "How can I pray for you?" But nobody did. You just kind of go to the altar, do your thing, and then you go back and sit down. And nobody says anything to you. So, if nobody says anything, if nobody asks you questions, you're not going to just automatically open up. It doesn't happen that way. So for 14 years, nothing. Never a word spoken from the pulpit. That God, just as a general message, that God will forgive you if you've had an abortion, so that I could know that he was going to forgive me. 14 years is a very long time to be silent. But if you don't ask, they're not going to tell. Because if you don't ask me, apparently you're not going to approve of me. So I'm not going to say anything. It's not going through an abortion experience. It's not something that you mention in casual conversation. So, time just keeps passing and nothing's going on. So.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
I'm sorry. So those 14 years later, I actually talked to someone about what I did. I was involved in a large Wesleyan church I was living in San Diego at the time. And I was involved in the singles ministry, doing small groups and that kind of thing. And the singles pastor and his wife had us over, several of us in leadership, over to their home for dinner every Tuesday. Well, this one particular Tuesday, after we had eaten and we were just sitting around the table talking and probably drinking iced tea or something, I don't know.
Sweet tea.
Sweet tea, oh yeah. But Debbie said she had something to say. So Debbie starts talking, and all of a sudden she mentions abortion. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, in front of our pastor, you're going to talk about that? Well, I sat there watching Pastor Chuck, believing in my heart that he was going to condemn her. And he didn't. The look of compassion on the expression on his face, and oh, Debbie, just that little bit opened up my heart. And I knew it was going to be safe to talk about my abortion at some point. So, that's huge. To have someone show you by the look on their face that they care.
Yes.
So, later that evening, I called Debbie back to Pastor Chuck and his wife Jan. We went back to their room because I wanted to be at the back of the house. I didn't want anybody to hear me. So I went back and I told Debbie first. And she said, "Oh, BJ, does Chuck know?" And I said, "No. Oh, I can't tell him." She said, "But he needs to know." So so then she left the bedroom. They came back, and I told both Chuck and Jan what I had done. And by this time, I'd already known him for, I don't know, probably 7 years. And he said, "Oh, BJ, how come you never told me?" And I said, because I didn't think you'd want to be my friend anymore. I didn't think you would love me if you knew what a terrible thing was that I did. And the first thing he did is he let me, he hugged me. And I wept like I hadn't cried at all. For all those years, I didn't do anything. But because he was kind and compassionate, and I knew he cared, and I knew he still wanted to be my friend, yes, that spoke volumes to me. Yes. So then the next person I was to tell was at that time, he's my late husband now, but at that time he was my fiancé, and his name is Wayne, a real sweetheart.
Can you remind, some people will know the man that he looks like? What's the guy?
I mentioned it to Jade the other night.
I'm like, describe what your husband looks like. Yeah.
Andy Williams.
Do you guys know who Andy Williams is?
And she said, huh? I don't know him.
Like, no.
And I'm thinking, what?
I believe.
How do you not know Andy Williams? He's good.
Excuse my French, but would we say that Andy Williams is old?
Yeah, we would say that.
So her husband looked like Andy Williams. I never had the privilege of meeting her husband. So I was like, describe what she looks like. And he's like, well, when he wears a red sweater, he looks like Andy Williams. I'm like, who's that? She's like, you're so young. Sorry.
Oh, the things you have missed in life.
I wish that I knew who he was. I'm going to go back maybe
today.
His
voice was like no other.
Yeah.
And he was so good looking.
Yes. And your husband was funny and dark looking. And handsome, right?
But he didn't sing. Well, he did sing pretty good, but not like Andy Williams.
Yeah. Okay, so back to, you told your fiance.
So then Chuck said, have you told Wayne? And I said, oh, no, I'm not telling Wayne. And Chuck said, why? And I said, because if he finds out, he won't want to marry me. And Chuck said, oh, yeah, he will. So Wayne came back to the back of the house, and I told him. I don't even remember exactly anything that was said, because that was back in 1986. Yeah. But I do remember that he said, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. And then he let me cry. And then he still loved me, and he still wanted to marry me. And I was so afraid he wouldn't. The stigma, the shame that comes along with that experience, it's devastating. And you just think your whole world's falling apart, and it will never, ever get better. But all of my life, God has been faithful. Amen. He has been faithful to give me my friend, Noni, who led a post-abortion workshop weekend. It was a Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And during that weekend, she had promised at the beginning that when it was over, I would never be the same again. And I thought, and that was in 1993, so my abortion was on April 21st, 1972, almost 50 years. So from 1972 to 1993, I thought, what could God possibly do to do more than put a Band-Aid on all of that, all those years of heartache and shame and silence. Silence is awful when you can't talk to anybody. So Noni was right. The things that we went through on Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday after lunch, church and lunch, and then we went back in the afternoon and evening. And God did change my life that weekend. He didn't change it and then then it stopped, because it's actually still going on right now. The healing just doesn't stop. So the first thing I noticed when I got home I think it was actually Saturday night, when I got home and went to bed, I was laying there in the bed with my back to Wayne and facing the wall, and I reached down on the floor and picked up a teddy bear that I had kept on the bed. And I held that teddy bear, and I just held it really, really close. And then I thought, oh, if Wayne sees me, he's going to think I've lost my mind. So I put it back on the floor, and I lay there for a little bit more, and I picked it up again. There was such a void, a felt void in my heart for what I had done because of the permission given me by my friend Noni to talk about it. Talk. You got to talk. You have to talk about your heartache, because it just festers and it just becomes ugly inside. So I picked up that teddy bear for the second time and slept with it all night long. And it was so interesting still today to feel that void, that emptiness for the first time after 20-some years of holding it inside. So then part of the healing process is naming. First of all, is asking God to tell you the sex of the baby. And just as soon as Noni said that, God spoke to my heart, you had a boy. So I thought, oh, well, that's kind of cool. So one of the exercises we did in the workshop was to write a letter to our child. And I had actually already written a letter when I first met Noni, and then I didn't do anything else. But if you are not a writer, if you're not a journaler, if you don't journal, it's amazing the things that come out once you put that pen in your hand and start writing. So I wrote the letter to my baby and asked him to forgive me, and I was so sorry. I'm so sorry what I did. I didn't mean to. But at that time in my life, I honestly did not know what I was doing. I knew I was getting rid of the baby, but I didn't know. I wish I had it with me. I didn't know my baby was this long. I didn't know that. I didn't know that my baby could feel, that my baby moved through the procedure. I'm assuming he did. So then Noni did something really cool. She said, well, I want to know the name of your baby. And I said, okay. So I came up with Nathan. And I have Nathan here. I have two Nathans in my life that I absolutely love. So we'll go a little side story. From our church in Marion, from my church, Laura Scheibel. Their baby's name is Nathan. And it's just the cutest baby boy. He's just curly hair and he's just adorable. So I think it was 2 Easters ago, I went to another Laura's house for Easter dinner, and Laura and her family were there. And Nathan is 3 now, and he would have to have been about 1 at that time. And we were sitting out on the back deck, on Laura's deck. The kids were looking for Easter eggs and running all over the place. And I got to hold, I don't mean I got to because I did it before, but I held Nathan. So I'm sitting there in the sun holding Nathan on April 21st, which was it would have been the 48th anniversary of my abortion. But I was holding Nathan, and I was loving him, and we were laughing together, and we were talking, and it was just unbelievable when God reminded me that it was April 21st. So now I have 3 special Nathans in my life. So one of the reasons, getting out of there.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that Noni had asked me what my baby's name was because she wanted to make me a doll. She wanted me to make something that I could hold on to. She has embroidered on his heart, has a red heart underneath here. Has a red heart underneath here. And it says it's Nathan Joel. My middle name is Joe, J-O. And I thought, well, I need to make his name part of my name. So I named him Nathan Joel.
BJ, can we pause there for a second?
Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you for sharing your tremendous story. I want to lean into a couple things before we talk about the rest of your life. I am so struck by the fact that the compassion on the pastor's face when her friend confessed, and that it was the compassion of, is it Pastor Chuck? Pastor Chuck's face, that seeing his response to someone confessing sin, that it was what propelled you and allowed you, gave you permission to share your story. And I'm also really struck by the fact you said that that you, because no one talked about it, and all that silence, what do you do with the shame? That we even said that last night, and you said some today about 14 years. For 14 years, you were silent, and that because no one talked about it, that it made you feel more shame and more guilt. And something that I asked BJ last night, I said, how many times have you shared your story at church? And she said that this was the 3rd time that she'd spoken to a college group. She had spoken to a women's group. And I said, well, what do you think the reason is that you haven't shared on a Sunday morning? And she said, because I don't think the church knows what to do with abortion. And I think that that's so true. And as Nathan and I, we've been pastors for 1.5 years now. We were missionaries in Uganda and trying to learn how to lead the church. And Heartbeats is an organization here in Licking County that offers so much support to families and men and women in our community. And at one of their recent gatherings, their speaker was talking about how we need to talk about abortion from the pulpit, just like we would talk about adultery or pornography. And I think one of the reasons why we don't talk about abortion is we want to be so sensitive. I never want to cause further shame. And what I love about what you have said is you've said that by not talking about it, by being silent, it's almost as if those who have had abortions, who are sitting in our pews, because 4 in 10 women who have had an abortion are sitting in the church, is that they feel like their sin is too big for God to redeem because it's not spoken of. that you sit in the pew and you think, well, they talked about pornography and they talked about adultery, but the pastor, he won't even utter the word abortion. So that means I must be quiet. Mm-hmm. And so I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving us language so that we know how to move forward in this church. And I love that. I love that your vulnerability and just in helping us to know how to lead the church better. Something that I want to point out before you talk about how the Lord, his redeeming work, is two things. One, I am obsessed with her friend Noni, who made her this doll. I think that I want to be like Noni. Something that I love about Jesus is when I think about your story, BJ, I think about how Jesus healed the leper and how the community, there's so much stigma about the leper, and you absolutely could not go near and touch the leper. There were leper colonies or places for them to go. And Jesus didn't just decide to stand right here and to, maybe put his hand out and just heal the leper, but he touched the leper. It literally says in Matthew 8 and Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and his leprosy was seized. And what I love about your story, BJ, is that the Lord didn't just forgive you. He restored you, and he didn't just forgive you, but it says in his word that in our mother's wombs he formed us, and he whispered to your heart, it was a boy, and his name was Nathan. Like, he loves you so much that he was that personal. He didn't just heal you, but he touched you in such a way that would heal your heart in such a way to know that it was a person and a name. And then he gave you Noni. He touched you even more. He didn't have to, but he touched you through Noni and spoke to Noni. And Noni loved you so much that she said, BJ needs further healing. She has a void. She's sorry. She wants to be redeemed. She wants to be healed. And so I'm going to make her a doll. And not only am I going to make her a doll to hug and to love on and to ask for forgiveness to, but I'm going to stitch his name, Nathan, on his heart. In this church, we've been talking a lot about vulnerability. And Nathan gave a message a couple months ago about he was standing here, and Matt Booth brought in piles and piles of dirt, and he put the dirt on the pulpit, and Nathan covered his body and messed himself up with dirt, and he was encouraging us to get messy into people's lives and get messy, get in their sin. And when I think of Noni, that's what I think. I want to be like Noni. She got invested in your life and got dirty in it with you, and loved you so much. And I just think that the kindness of Noni to make you a doll, and not to be for what you did to make her shrill and to shriek, and I don't know what to do with it, but she leaned in, she invited you to this retreat, she affirmed you and loved you, and she gave you something that to this day you're finding healing with. I want to be the kind of disciple of Jesus Christ who gets in the dirt in people's lives and goes even further still, like Jesus did with the leper, that he touched him. He didn't just heal him, but he touched him. So I want to be like Noni, that's all. So, and like Jesus.
I want to comment about carrying him from the bedroom to the living room the other day.
Yeah, so BJ, in preparation of this talk, as you can imagine, has, you feel so many feelings. And yeah, go ahead.
So I knew I was going to bring Nathan with me, and so I went into my closet, reached up on the top shelf where I'd had him for a while, and brought him down and put him in a chair in my bedroom. But I wanted to remember to bring him this weekend, so I wanted to carry him from my bedroom out into the living room. And it probably won't mean a lot to you, but I got to the door frame, from my bedroom and my living room, and I stopped. And I just leaned against the door frame. And I don't think I cried, but I just said, Mommy is so sorry. I'm so sorry I hurt you. And it was just for that brief moment, but I couldn't move. For some reason, God stopped me right there in my tracks, and I stopped, and I just talked to my Nathan. And then driving, I had him sitting in my passenger seat, and I reached over there and would grab a hold of his little hand, and I was just sitting there talking to him when it was safe to drive with one hand. Not on 270.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But I was sitting there, and I just was holding his hand, and I was rubbing it, and I was saying, I'm so glad you came with me. I didn't cry.
Yeah.
I was just happy to have him with me.
Yes.
And I said, Mommy's sorry for what she did for you, but we're going to go this weekend, and we're going to talk to people, and we're going to tell them what Jesus has done for Mommy's heart.
Yes. Amen.
And
yes.
So
Yes.
50, April 21st, it'll be 50 years. God is still healing parts of my heart.
Yes.
I'll go for a long time and not really.
Yeah.
I think about it every single day. I think about it when I see children. I think about it when I see my sisters with their kids, with their grandkids. I think about it when my siblings are talking about making arrangements for their kids to get together. I can't not think about it. But what it reminds me of when I think of Nathan, and I think of, because I ended up not, for my own, I guess, choice, I ended up not having children. So I have no, what do you call them? Blood children?
Yeah. Something that I want to say that I was thinking about is I was doing some research about specifically abortion, and I also, before we end this service, I don't, shame is so huge, and I know there are ones in our congregation who, your abortion, there might be women today who have had an abortion and have never spoke of that, and I pray, hope, find healing through your story, and have permission. We're giving you permission to speak that and to find healing through Jesus with that. But I also think that there's so much shame that we carry with behaviors, attitudes, sin, and we, like you, for years and years and years, for 14 years, you didn't speak about it. But I was doing some research about abortion specifically, and there's an article from Focus on the Family, and it says, many women with unexpected pregnancies silently go from the church pew to the abortion clinic, convinced the church would gossip rather than help. More than 4 in 10 women who have had an abortion were churchgoers when they ended their pregnancy. Only 7% of women who had their abortions discussed this with someone at the church. 3/4 say the church had no influence in their decision to terminate a pregnancy. 2/3 say church members judge single women who are pregnant. So 2/3 of the women who've had abortions say that church members will judge, when they're single, judge them who are pregnant. A majority think churches simply oversimplify decisions about their pregnancy options, and fewer than half believe churches are prepared to help with unwanted pregnancies. It's huge. 43% report attending church monthly. 43% reported of attending church monthly. So in 2020, in just Ohio, alone, in 2020, there were 20,605 abortions that happened in Ohio alone. And statistically speaking, based on what I just read, that means that potentially 8,242 of those women attended church monthly. 8,242 of those women potentially sat in church, felt like they would be gossiped about, and still felt like there was no way out. When I read that, I just thought, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing? Why are we here? And I was thinking about how key vulnerability is. And Nathan has done such an incredible job of leading vulnerability in our church and in our congregation. And Nathan often talks about speaking against gossip and how it causes so much damage and harm to the church. I just thought it was incredible. The end of this article says, for most women with an unwanted pregnancy, if nobody in the church is willing to say, we are going to help you through this, then it is hard for them to rationally keep the child. So, it makes me think of a time in my life when I knew the Lord, but I called it in a trickle. You know, like as a believer in Christ, you kind of go from just a little bit of baby trickle knowing Jesus, and then you're like ankle deep, and then you're knee deep, and then you're waist deep in Jesus. And when I was in a trickle, there was a congregation member in our church who also counseled Nathan and I. And at that time, when I was in a trickle, Nathan and I were in a really difficult time in our marriage. We came from very different backgrounds and parented differently. And if you came into our home those first couple of years of marriage, it was really difficult and it was painful. And when I was in a trickle in that time, there was a girl in our congregation who had an interview for the newspaper, and she talked about like what kind of food she liked and what sport she was in, and then she put, who is your role model? And she said Jade Metz. And that's always stuck with me, because what I realized, you guys, is that when I was in a trickle, when her parents knew the difficulty that I was going through with Nathan, the shame that I had in my life because of past decisions that I made, that meant that Lauren's parents talked kindly about me at the dinner table. That means that even though they knew all of that about me, their language about me at the dinner table, and after I would come like you to the altar constantly those first few years in that marriage. And that meant that when they went to lunch after church and Lauren was there and they saw me go to the altar, they spoke kind things about me. Lauren Johnson, when I was in a trickle, when I was a mess, when I was in so much shame and had so much guilt, the language of the people in my church community was such that they could say I was a role model. I can't get over it. Because I believe that the way that our church is going to grow, and the way that I believe that lives are going to be changed is through two things. It is through vulnerability and through life-speaking words about every person that comes in here. We are pro-life, and we are to speak life. We are to be a life-speaking church who loves every person who comes in. And so this article and focus on the family made me shudder, because the common reason is because of gossip. And what you said is, I didn't tell anyone for 14 years because I was afraid no one would be my friend. Mm-hmm. So Jesus redeemed your life, and then he sent you to the field, to Ukraine and Russia, where you led post-abortion groups. And BJ has written an incredible Bible study for women who've had abortions. Do you just want to quickly tell them just about the work that you did in Ukraine, and how Heartbeats actually helped facilitate the healing for many people in Ukraine? In Ukraine, yes.
In Ukraine. In Russia, it started
in Russia.
Heartbeat started in Russia.
Because that's what Jesus does, is that he has the power. The nurse at the clinic said, you can get on with your life. Well, she figuratively got on with her life, but she was numb for what she described as 21 years of numbness. And then you found healing through Jesus Christ. And what he does is he redeems you in such a way that you have the capacity to bring people into that redemption story and to help them to know who Jesus is. And so he did that for you in Ukraine and in Russia. So tell them just a little bit about that.
Wayne and I both went, well, of course we both went. We went to Ukraine, went to Russia first. So in Russia and Ukraine, without going into how it happened, we ended up being asked to come into the schools. Wayne's focus was alcohol and drugs and family dysfunction, codependency, all of that, all those terms that go together. So we went into the schools, started with the upper grades in the high schools, but we also were invited to universities to go share. I shared, whenever I talked about the truth about abortion, talked about fetal development, and then the truth about abortion, because in both of those countries, it's like 95 to 97% of the women have had an abortion, and most of them have had more than one, because it's a generational thing. But we had started, we were in Russia, and I had read a book. I don't even remember what the book was about, but at the back of the book, it mentioned some, what's the word? Credits, some, research, referrals. And one of them was Heartbeat International. And Wayne said, oh, honey, you won't believe this. So I mentioned that to him, and he said, oh, we need to contact them. So I emailed them, told them what I was doing about talking about abortion and the fetal development, literally using my fingernail as, and I don't remember now the exact, whether it was 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but using my fingernail as an example of this is the size of the baby. Yeah. Well, I kind of got it across. Then I read about Heartbeat International. I emailed them. They responded to me. They said, stop by and see us sometime. And I really
in Ohio. You're the Ohio location, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't remember, but talking to Jade, I know we came to Ohio. And Newark is where the first...
Is it Newark? What's the first... Does anybody know what the first location of Heartbeats was in Ohio? What'd you say? Columbus, okay. Yeah, so somehow in the area.
So I don't know whether it came to Newark or Columbus.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They invited me to come to their office. We met. Yeah. We talked. And I walked away with a box of models to take back to Russia. So then I go back to Russia and I have these models of the size of each, I don't know. I don't even know that terminology. But the size of the babies as they're growing. And so then going into the classroom, instead of using my little fingernail, I actually had a model in my hand that I could pass around, and the students could hold it in their hand. I'll never know until I get to heaven how many lives were saved because they heard what was actually being done. It wasn't a mass of tissue. It was a baby. But I am just forever grateful for Heartbeat International because they changed, pretty much changed my lectures. because I had something tangible.
Can we just clap for Jesus who does that? Like, seriously. BJ, I want to ask you one final thing. Mm-hmm. If your life could teach our congregation anything, what would you say it would be?
I think you are actually on the right path right now with Pastor Nathan's messages, with Jade's messages. When you become a church that is vulnerable, and you, Nathan, give the people permission to be real, something I have never heard from the pulpit, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am.
Well, what was that guy's name? George.
Oh, yeah.
Who was it? George Strait?
George Williams.
George Williams.
Andy
I'm going to
Williams.
Google how. Oh, Andy. Yeah.
He was older than
Yes,
me.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
I mean, you're doing it. You're doing it right now.
Yes.
You're doing it by giving me the privilege to sit in front of your church and tell your people what I did, and then tell you how wonderful God is.
Yes. Amen.
One of the phrases I remember, and one of the first songs we sang was, "Let me tell you about my Jesus."
Yes.
Let me tell you about my Jesus and what he did for me.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Do we love her even more now than we did when she came? I mean it. Honestly, I want to stand and I want to clap for you. Thank you, BJ. It's been all these years. And this morning in my office, she said, "I'm still a little worried that they won't be my friends after this." And that's what shame does. That's what the enemy does. Because he keeps us quiet. And he does not want us to speak so that we're quiet, so that God cannot do the redeeming work that he does. And so I say, we still love you, and we love you even more, and we definitely want to be your friend. Pastor Sean, can you come forward? I mean that. Yes, I mean it.